Hi, everybody. My name is Patrick Kolbeck. Welcome to episode 3 of the Mission Brief, which is News by the Numbers. What do we mean by news by the numbers? Well, most newscasts have an agenda. As a result, the stories that are selected to fit the narrative of that agenda. We don't do it that way. How do we select our stories then? Well, quite simply put, we do it by the numbers. And what numbers are these, you may ask? Well, that's where Nick Ruiz fits in. Nick is an expert in the field of data analytics, and if you watch some of our shows before, he goes over his proprietary software platform that searches public data to highlight what topics are actually driving culture and the conversations we're all engaged in all across America. These topics are ranked by the numbers. So we use these rankings to drive the content of our weekly mission brief. All right, Nick, welcome aboard here. So what topics do we need to be keeping an eye on this week, Nick?
All right, here's what we got. So we got three really interesting ones here. And the first one, you'll notice, the more observant amongst you will notice that there is usually where we put our LTA number, which is language to action. That's effectively the language intensity and the likelihood of seeing direct action as a result of that language trend on the internet. You'll notice there's an NA next to it.
Yeah.
That's our first topic, which is the rise of deepfake or AI-generated voices, faces in the news.
Okay.
We literally did that scan last night.
Okay, so it's hot off the presses.
It is about as hot off the presses and hot onto bare metal drives as you could possibly imagine. So we literally finished that scan maybe 2 o'clock in the morning today, technically. So, but then we have election 2020, which is the final scan metric. So we have some interesting data points for folks to keep an eye on as we approach the big day.
Mm-hmm.
It's coming up. We're T-minus only a handful of days away. And then we have also another election 2020 topic. Shocker, I know. But we have preparing for chaos regardless of the result. And it's kind of a glimpse into the new normal of the divisiveness as far as the American political landscape goes today.
Alrighty, well, let's do a deep dive into that rise of the deep fake.
Okay, so one of the things that we want folks to keep an eye on, and this has become, so for those of you that have seen the story regarding the Hunter Biden, the dossier, and Martin Aspen, right, and the notion that this entire story was generated by, out of thin air, effectively, down to even the actual person, this Martin Aspen person, is, in a sense, a deep fake, which is the person doesn't exist. His face and his likeness is a composition of other faces and is generated by artificial intelligence programs that are designed to do that.
So in a way, it's kind of Steele Dossier version 2.0 using high tech.
It is. It's what happens if you let nerds get a hold of the Steele Dossier and they say, "Hold my beer, watch this."
Yeah.
It's taken to a whole new level. So what I kind of wanted to draw attention to, and I'm not going to debate the political validity of whether it is or it isn't, or it's cover or whatever the case may be. That's for other people to kind of analyze and decide that have a far greater knowledge base on that than I do. But what I can say from a techie perspective is as such. There are right now companies, including big companies like gaming, for instance, Riot Games. They produce League of Legends. There's 8 million users on a day playing that thing. It is a massive revenue generator. As COVID hit, they discovered that a lot of their online influencers, their personalities, weren't able to get out and get to these tournaments and get to game centers and stuff and actually promote their products. So what they did is they turned to AI-generated deepfakes. And I say deepfake there, not really in a negative connotation, but what they've done is they've turned and they've said, well, we don't have to pay real people. They can't even get out because of what's going on with COVID as an example. So we're going to create these online influencers that we have ultimate control of because they're not real people. They're compositions of what we think our market wants to see. And they can do videos with them. They look like they're real people. And if you didn't really know that these were...
Princess Leia makes a real-time appearance in some of these... So Carrie Fisher, who we all know is dead, who appeared in a Star Wars film afterwards. Just to put that in context for everybody, this is somebody who doesn't even exist, or somebody who used to exist, but somebody decided that they wanted to reanimate. They're actually making the point here, and obviously the implications of this from a political perspective are significant.
Well, yes, because there's the innocuous usage of it. Now, just to give an example of how effective this is, for those of you that do know Instagram, I personally am not an Instagram person, but there's one of these deepfake personalities or one of these fabricated AI personalities has 400,000 followers on Instagram and is making a ton of money as an online influencer, the same way an actual person would. Except you have to look at the advantages of that from a
Well, in fairness, there's a lot of very artificial people who have a lot of Instagram followers. So
I was just going to insert humor there.
all right. Okay.
It had and I applaud it.
All right.
No, but that's something I want folks to be aware of going forward, because these things are only getting better. I mean, like, as an example, and I'll be a little bit facetious about it. If I wanted to have a conversation here, I have a friend of mine that works in downtown Pittsburgh that works on these kind of programs, but they do it for teaching foreign languages.
Yeah.
Right. So you can actually see a person on screen speaking a foreign language to you, and it helps you learn the language, and it's totally innocuous, and it's actually really cool. But if we wanted to have fun, and we had one too many Miller Lights together, I could have Ronald Reagan sitting next to me here, and we could have a conversation. Right?
Yeah.
And obviously, for folks don't, Ronald Reagan is no longer alive, but the interactions would seem completely natural to the point down to the shadows, down to the lighting and everything. So I want people to be aware of this stuff moving forward, because that is a nuclear weapon in the art of political influence. It's everybody's dream. And I mean, you can go back, you can talk Project Mockingbird, or you can go back to even Goebbels. I mean, imagine the propaganda you could do. You could just invent someone out of thin air that's never going to question your narrative, do exactly what you tell them, and never develop a conscience.
Right.
That is a nuclear weapon.
And who never needs to be suicided. Right? This is a case where and we've already seen the willingness to use fake information via things like the Steele dossier to the extreme, and have serious implications upon our political process, and as a result. And these go much deeper than just putting up a picture of Mission Control in your background here. So
these are a little bit more intense. I mean, you can get, as far as some of these deep fakes go, they're out there, and there's certain subtle ways to spot them. So in instances where you see like something, the ears aren't quite symmetrical, or a pupil or an iris isn't quite symmetrical and perfect, you can pick up on that. But that technology is only going to improve.
Right.
We're at version 1.0 of that. So by the time you get to version 2 and 3, especially, where I see this being a weapon is if I come on and I say I'm Mr. XYZ, and I have proof that Pat did X, Y, A, B, and C. Okay, I'm now going to turn to my expert, and he's going to corroborate my story. Now, my expert, I've completely fabricated out of thin air, and the other expert I'm about to interview, I've completely fabricated out of thin air. So you can create these echo chambers with these, and it's so dangerous, and it's so devastating, and people are afraid of misinformation on the internet now. In the words of Bachman Turner Overdrive, man, you guys ain't seen nothing yet.
I know,
as far as what's going to.
And this is kind of in context of elections, but let's take this up a notch, and let's think around national security. What if somebody had a deep fake of saying, hey, Kim Jong-un just declared war in the United States, or something like that? How long do you have, if he's got ICBMs pointed at the country, to go off and verify whether or not that was a true statement or not? And it's got real world.
You're getting into where it is that level of almost movie plot crazy.
And you got to be able to. It's a game, as you highlighted. It's a game of spy versus spy right now. Countermeasure versus active weapon system, and it's. And I just hope that the countermeasure folks can keep up, because it's got serious implications. So number 2, we got a couple items that are dealing specifically with the 2020 election, considering the date and considering we're the Friday before Tuesday election. I mean, it kind of makes sense that this is kind of in everybody's wheelhouse, and it's getting a lot of traffic in discussions nowadays. So let's zero in on the first one here, which is the kind of the final scan metrics on the 2020 election.
The final scan metrics, things that we want to encourage some folks to look at is, again, we're going on record saying 2 things. Number 1, this one's going to be close, guys. Number 2, the turnout is going to be huge. And when you look at the layers available for margin of error, mail-ins, absentees, late voting, in person, do we vote in person, don't we vote in person, is, the number of variables around an antiquated system that's already broken, let's face it. The process by which we cast a vote in this country is now going to be under a level of nonlinear stress from all these extra little ancillary, and most of it's because of COVID.
They're changing all the election process. So you say it was vulnerable beforehand and it was fragile. Well, they just threw a bull in the china shop called COVID that is changing the rules on an hour by hour basis right now in my home state of Michigan.
Well, same here in Pennsylvania, beautiful scenic Pittsburgh area here. So you and I have the distinct pleasure of living in two of the three, maybe four states where we're forecasting there to be, we're going to call it recount close, and we're going to call it, I'm not going to use the word process subversion, but I'm going to call it process unstable. I think stories coming out of here, which is the system's just not going to work. There's going to be a lot of confusion. And when you add that level of confusion to an already hotly contested election, more politically divisive than anything I dare say since the 1800s, the mid-1800s, that's a lit match. And I have a feeling because of just how broken that process is, even on its best day, everything working as intended, the process, this from experience, is still questionable. So you're going to take all these additional stressors, place it on this system that's just really not designed for it to begin with, and you don't get to act surprised when something lets go. So I think we're going to be in, Michigan, Ohio, we're looking in their general direction, certainly Pennsylvania, and it's already starting to creep up in terms of, you can see we have a 498 LTA collective there. And that 498 is a lot of that. If we took that just from four states, that would be a 6.8, 6.7. And those four states are Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and believe it or not, brace yourselves, everyone, Texas. Because Texas came pretty darn close to electing one Mr. Beto O'Rourke a number of years ago. And if you look at the demographic shift in that state, it shifted in favor of Democrat, not Republican. There's a lot more Democrats now. There aren't a lot more Republicans. So,
well, let me highlight some of the things I've seen here in Michigan that are going to kind of destabilize the election right now. I've seen proof of it. Number one, our Secretary of State went off and allowed a third party known as Rock the Vote to go off and have direct access to our voter registration file. So they are doing the data entry into who is qualified to vote and who is not qualified to vote. And anybody who knows who Rock the Vote is, it's technically, it's not a political organization. It is something that is an advocacy organization to go off and increase the number of people voting, but predominantly they go after Democratic voters. And so do you think that there might be a bias inside the voter registration for Democratic voters as a result? Could be. Could also be fraudulent data being entered because there's no verification of the data that's being put in there. So that is one key data point. Now with COVID, they're introducing arbitrary 6-foot rules. So, and we've had on tape, if you go to bigleaguepolitics.com, you're going to go off and see a tape where a poll worker instructor is actually instructing poll workers to make sure that there's not a 6-foot gap between them and the wall behind them, so a poll challenger cannot go off and see what they are doing. We've also been denied access to the area where a poll challenger has been denied access to areas where they're validating the identity of absentee voters. You couple that with the fact that we've got good old Mark Zuckerberg putting $250 million in towards ballot boxes to just go off and harvest ballots from everywhere, which technically are under camera surveillance, but in practicality, nobody's monitoring what's going on at these ballot boxes. You've got a recipe for some very interesting developments in the wake of this election. So which kind of leads us into topic 3, which is preparing for chaos around the 2020 election. What specifically are you seeing out there, Nick?
Well, I'll be the first to say, everybody get your election helmets ready. This one's going to be interesting. So all kidding aside, though, one of the biggest metrics or linguistic shifts that we've seen is something that we're calling capitulation to a new normal. And that's scary. So capitulation to a new normal is, we've seen stores like Wal-Mart, for instance, in preparation for what they consider to be the inevitable looting and destruction, regardless of the outcome. They've just thrown their hands up and said, well, you know what, I'll tell you what, we'll just take the guns and ammo off the shelf. That way, when the store gets looted, at least they don't get that. That is a major, major, major shift in capitulation to accepting this new perma-civil unrest normal, right? This new political unrest normal, or perma-political unrest normal. That's a step forward. That's a scary step forward, because that's a big multinational corporation throwing their hands up going, well, there's nothing we can do about it, so we might as well do what we can. And we're seeing this more and more, not just from corporate America, but we're seeing this more and more just from ordinary citizens, where they're just throwing their hands up and going, I'm going to go out and buy an extra couple of bottles of water. I'm going to go out and buy an extra, couple canned goods or whatever, just in case. So we're actually starting to, as a collective society, we're starting to accept this political divisiveness and the aftermath of it from the both left and right. We're starting to accept it as a new normal, and it's starting to look suspiciously like some countries in Europe, where they just accept that as a normal. It's not like, whoa, guys, everybody chill out for a second. We can get to the bottom of this. We're beyond that point now where we just accept it as part of normal life, kind of like math, believe it or not. Now, I personally don't, you personally don't, but these acceptings of new normals, if I had to summarize 2020 and everything that surrounded the election, is that it was a major advancement of broad swaths of society accepting new normals that even 4 or 5 years ago would have been looked at as insane.
How much of this is connected to the so-called global reset? Because you talk about how it's very similar to what's going on all around the world. What's the tie-in with that?
Well, what we're seeing is, so election violence and election contra, all of these are symptomatic. They're not the cause, but they're visible symptoms of it, okay? So we're starting to see this global restructuring in terms of economics is a really, really good one to study.
Is it orchestrated? Do we see evidence that this is being orchestrated, or this is just a natural, bottoms-up effect of some circumstance on the ground, maybe due to COVID?
It's both. It's natural civilization, evolutionary forces, I think, that are driven in some cases by the decentralization of information. The fact that, look, we live in a world now where, 1950, 1960, you had 5 or 6 sources to get your news from, and that news traveled at a certain rate of speed. People could react to stimuli at a certain rate of speed. Interaction was limited to the folks that were around you, or maybe that you could call on a telephone. That was it. Now we have this matrix of completely decentralized information that quite literally travels at the speed of light, to the point where if something, look what happened just in Nice, France. With what happened in Nice, France, right? You can now see the reaction of that instantaneously, globally, and it's not just the superficial man on the news, man on the news desk reading the news and going, hey, this is what happened. You have peer-to-peer sharing of information, so I think that's a big driver of it. It's natural. It's the byproduct of a major variable change, which is the internet and the ability to communicate on a global level insanely quickly. And then I think there's a concerted effort push behind it. So you have, call that a supercharger, if you will, but where we are now in 2020 as compared to 2016, you can take 10 or 15, and I know you could say this about any 5-year period in history, but the leaps and bounds towards new accepted normals from 16 to 20 has been more than anything I think we've ever seen since, really, I would even say you'd have to go back into the 80s to see anything like that, the acceptance of new normals, connectivity and such. But where we're at now, so what I would encourage people as we head into the election, this is the last one of these we'll be doing before the election, hopefully the byproduct that comes from this is that when all the dust settles and all the scrap metal, if I may quote Lewis Simpson in some poetry, when everything's all said and done, hopefully the process by which we vote in this country is front and center, and everyone finally gets a good look at how broken it is so that it can be fixed.
Oh, so bottom line is keep your hands and feet in the ride at all times.
Yep, please remain seated.
And by the way, if you want to find out more about the processes that Nick is talking about, I'm going to provide some links at the end of this video. You can go into our Election Integrity Solution podcast, and we do a pretty deep dive into everything election related, and some links to diagrams of the actual election processes for your edification. Nick, thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate you joining us every week here for these News by the Number briefs, and thank you again for your briefs. And if you're interested in getting additional data analysis of this sort, please be sure to visit evolutionconsulting.world. Remember, tune in to Let's Fix Stuff every Friday to get ahead of the news cycle and get your latest mission brief. Be sure to visit letsfixstuff.org for the latest news, data, and humor and solutions. And thank you so much for watching, and be sure to check out all the content that we have out at Let's Fix Stuff YouTube channel. The channel features videos like our Meet the Rocket Scientist series, Rational Data-Driven Solution podcast, and a lot more. And if you'd like to support our work and get special access to what we call classified data no one else has, please consider joining our Right Stuff Club for only 16 cents per day. Thank you again, Nick. Now, you guys, let's go fix some stuff.